Today's News Talk Radio.
I do a lot of streaming radio.
I do a lot of free streaming.
TNTRadio.live.
All right, it's been a couple months, but I like to get JJ on to get an update from him. I very much enjoy his Substack, jjdawson.substack.com. I recommend people bookmark it, subscribe to it, and whatnot. And you'll find him on Twitter X at RealJJDawson. How's it going, JJ?
Hi, Hrvoje. Thanks for having me back. It's great to be here again. I'm keeping my camera off, so apologies to the listeners who are watching. Unfortunately, some of us do have to keep our identities concealed in this foul year of our Lord, 2023.
Yeah, no worries. You know, the whole cancel culture thing, and it's all right. I shaved, so I look slightly less ugly than usual. But you've got a great Substack with I think deep insights, very well written, and I read one of your recent pieces on "You Will Comply and You'll Be Happy: The Rise of the Career Woman and Why Troublesome Men Are No Longer Needed by the Machine." And you work in a corporate environment, and your experience, as I was reading it, I recalled, because I used to work in a corporate environment, and I had some of the same stuff going on. I think you were talking about a course you had to take, and then you're running through it at double speed. I was doing the same thing where I was working, but your latest thoughts on this and the corporatocracy.
Yeah, well, I mean, where do I start? As I mentioned in my piece, these corporate compliance modules are nothing new, and in the past, you go through it and you do your tax stuff, and you do your share trading stuff, you do all the sort of statutory obligations that the company is required to ensure that its employees complete. But then there's also the slightly more socially orientated stuff. One of those being sexual harassment and discrimination, and up until this point, those modules I'd always experienced as, a little bit tiresome, a little bit trite. You try and get through them as quickly as possible. But I always found they were quite reasonable. It was like, we don't want to discriminate against anyone on the basis of sex or race or sexual orientation, and there was always a logical and kind of a reasonable tone to it all. So you do the quizzes and you get all the right answers and you pass your compliance module, and you're like, well, most of that was just common sense, but it's a box ticking exercise. But this year, they slotted in this piece, and I would encourage anyone interested to read the article that Hrvoje just mentioned. This year, it took on a sinister new tone, and I felt the entire process had shifted towards a very political kind of messaging. So we'll jump straight to the part of the module that really caused me to write this article. First they started with this claim, this big axiomatic claim that 89% of women will experience sexual harassment, and they didn't source this, and it reminded me of the 1 in 5 figure, which they pulled out, around the time of the Me Too movement. 1 in 5 women on US college campuses will be raped or will be sexually assaulted. And, of course, anyone who followed that story will know that it subsequently turned out that the study was flawed. One of the key things about that study was it was self-selecting. So they didn't just randomly pick, a statistically significant sample of the population and say, have you been sexually assaulted at college? They offered it up to people who wanted to take the survey. So that immediately skews the data towards people who sort of have an axe to grind, right? So anyway, that whole thing was debunked. The 1 in 5 figure, 20% of women in college are not raped or sexually assaulted. And it just reminded me immediately of that. Where do they get this 90% figure from? We've gone from 20% to 90%. It wasn't sourced in the compliance module at all. There was no data set behind it. But I went on to complete the quiz, and in the quiz there was this question, what is the best way to decrease instances of sexual harassment in the workplace? And there were four options. You got to select one or four of them if you wanted. The first one was more women and people from underrepresented groups in leadership positions. Second one was listening to the targeted person and referring them on to appropriate support. The third was provide training for team leaders and management to effectively deal with reported instances. And the fourth was do nothing and hope the issues go away. I selected numbers 2 and 3, but I was told that I was incorrect, and I had to go back and recomplete the module. But they, of course, give you the right answer so that you can then select the right answer. And the right answer was, of course, the best way to reduce instances of sexual harassment in the workplace is more women and people from underrepresented groups in leadership positions. So I went back and dutifully selected the correct answer, and then I got a big green tick on my compliance module and a thumbs up and a congratulations, and I passed the test and I was compliant. And that's what motivated me to write this latest article, because it really is just an example of the slow creep of indoctrination coming down through the woke corporate superstructure, through the ESG matrix into companies, and right on down to the factory floor, where they no longer want you to just be aware of the differences between people and treat each other with respect. They want you to think a certain way about how the world should be structured, about how companies should be structured, and it's starting to feel very much like the Marxist dialectic. If we can get more of the right kind of people into positions of authority, we can make the world a perfect place.
I mean, it's so Orwellian. They want to get you to love Big Brother. If you read 1984, where he gives the wrong answer, and they want you to eventually give the right wrong answer and really believe it, and that's kind of what it sounds like. And what about equality, equity? Whatever it is that they say now, you get. If you talk about we should have mostly women working now, if that's what they're saying, well, that's not equal. We should have 50% men and 50% women. But now they're saying they should, and now that I'm thinking back to the corporate environment that I worked at, and I still talk to people who work there, and you can still follow stuff online. It just seems like I'm seeing more and more women are running the show. Again, nothing wrong with women running the show, but we've gotten to a point where this is now a weapon used by the globalists. I mean, we've crossed the Rubicon to the other extreme here, I think. And this is a worldwide thing. It's not just something that's happening, in your neck of the woods. I'm seeing it here in Mexico. It's happening in the U.S., Europe, other parts of Latin America, most likely. And so this is a global agenda. We're going to jump to our headlines real quick.
ENT Radio.
We're talking to JJ Dawson of jjdawson.substack.com. Do subscribe and follow him on Twitter, X at RealJJ Dawson, talking about his recent experience in the corporate globalist world, taking these modules that one is forced to take. I used to take stuff like this when I was working at the Tec de Monterrey here in Mexico, one of the top schools and universities that is de facto globalist. It's actually linked to the World Economic Forum, and more and more they've increased when it comes to the modules that you're forced to take every semester or quarter. They've just gotten more and more radical. I've had friends tell me recently that they're talking about toxic masculinity now in the courses, trying to re-educate people on that. That the majority of the students in my former place of employment are feminists. And I'm wondering at some point, JJ, if in the modules things will start to appear like, are you eating the correct in your diet? Are you including the correct percentage of bugs, crickets, worm protein? And I was this weekend I was hanging out with a former colleague of mine, Mexican. He's still working there. He was reminiscing on COVID times where you were forced to take a daily test on your smartphone about COVID, like if you were feeling ill or not, a questionnaire, and then you'd have to scan your phone in with the QR code to enter the campus. And I was telling my friend, like, if I had been working there at the time, I would have deliberately gone into the campus without my phone and said, I don't have my phone, I can't scan in. They wouldn't let me in. And then the students would be there in the class without the teacher, which is a big problem. I would have literally done stuff like that. I would have gotten fired because there's no way I would have complied with that stuff. But your further thoughts, what this all means. You talk about in the article that the Rockefeller Foundation bankrolled the second wave feminist movement, which it no doubt did. And you conclude saying the mandarins of the New World Order at the WEF, World Economic Forum, have set the agenda, and as the slogan goes, the future is female.
Yeah. And I wanted to talk about the Rockefeller Foundation and my thoughts around that. Just quickly circling back to what you said about it, about it's no longer about 50-50. It's about, having a majority of women. It actually reminded me of something that Ruth Bader Ginsburg said when asked, she was asked, when will there be enough women on the Supreme Court? And she actually said, when there's 9. So that really is a lot of the thinking, coming from the more radical types at the top of the stack here. But it is a fact that in the 60s and the 70s, the Rockefeller Foundation bankrolled the feminist movement. And the upshots of that were kind of twofold, as I lay out in my essay. And the first one, obviously, being that the tax base for the government doubled because suddenly you had twice as many workers. So that's great for the government because it allows them to increase the money supply to fund the forever wars and underwrite the ever expanding global debt bubble, which is underwritten by all of our labour. And indeed the future labour of our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. But it also has a benefit for the private sector in that it allowed them to basically permanently stagnate wage growth. So with the sudden oversupply of labour, they're able to pay everyone less. And if you look at the charts, there has been no real wage growth since they did that, and it's no coincidence either in my mind that that's right around the time Nixon took us off the gold standard, and this whole fractional reserve banking bubble really started to gain some steam. So those are sort of the practical monetary fiscal implications of what's going on with creating this gigantic propaganda narrative that women must have careers and women must work and they must enter the workforce as soon as possible and pack their kids off to early childhood education, which is run by the government, which is effectively just part of the indoctrination system. But I think there's also a more sinister intention behind it. And let me just say at the outset, I've got no problem with women being in the workforce. I'm all for it, with the proviso that that's what they truly want from their lives, and not just something that they've been brainwashed into thinking by the constant messaging in the media and through Hollywood and every other one of our institutions that the best thing a woman can do with her life is to have a career and to not have kids, which is more and more the messaging we're seeing. So to me, and I've been seeing this happening for a long time, and I can sense it in the workplace, at least for the last 10 years, I believe they want more women in positions of leadership because of the fact that, on balance, women are more agreeable, trait agreeableness is it's a well documented field of study, and Jordan Peterson and others have discussed it at length. Men tend to be less agreeable. They're more likely to ask for pay rises, and we already talked about the fact that they don't want to pay us more than they absolutely have to. Women are less inclined to question authority, and that's not all women, but if you look at the data on balance, it does tend to skew that way. And so to me, it's quite obvious. What does a machine that is interested in centralized, dogmatic, globalistic, monolithic control of everything, what kind of traits would they want in their gatekeepers, in their middle management positions, in their executive positions, and indeed on their boards of directors? Agreeable people who aren't going to question the program, people who are going to go along with it. I mean, apart from the simple mathematics, which we discussed, the benefits for the government and the private sector in flooding the workforce with labour, which again is part of this public-private partnership, or stakeholder capitalism, as Klaus Schwab calls it. Apart from that, I think there's a very practical reason for wanting to staff your institutions with women, and I think it's because, on balance, they're more compliant. And look, that's people would call me a misogynist for saying that. I love women, and I love the fact that men and women balance each other out. We're not the same. We were created differently to fulfill different roles within the family unit, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with the fact that we have different attributes and different traits. But the machine no longer wants troublesome men, as I say in the headline of my article, because troublesome men question authority. They come up with different ideas. They're ambitious. They look to supplant their mediocre bosses, and the machine loves to staff its middle management and its executive strata with mediocrities, because mediocrities go along with the program. People think the boards and the executive teams of companies run things. They don't run things. They're the gatekeepers. They administer the programs set by BlackRock, by the UN, by the World Economic Forum. They're just administrative people. And the best type of administrators are mediocrities, midwits, who don't question the program, who don't question authority, who don't innovate, who go along and say, yes, sir, no, sir. So, I'm not saying all women are like that. I'm saying because of the skew towards trait agreeableness in females, it makes more sense for a machine interested in centralized control to have more women in positions of leadership. So when we're told in our compliance modules that the best way to stop instances of sexual harassment in the workplace is to put more women in positions of leadership, and if anyone can tell me how that will actually stop sexual harassment, I'm all ears. It's not because the company or the corporate machine has any interest in preventing sexual harassment. It's because they want more compliant administrators in their machine.
And just to add, I think also, if you have more women working in the corporate world, that means a lot less babies and families, which
Correct.
serves the depopulation agenda. And this, you're reminding me of my experience where I was teaching international relations at the university here in Mexico, 7 years, and the department directors would frequently change. And when there was a female that was on the director for a while, she actually fired me or took away my courses, didn't assign me any courses at the university for 1 or 2 semesters until she was promoted and moved on and a male came back. But she basically, I think, because I was non-compliant in right think, right? I was teaching conspiracy theory, and I think that's a perfect example. And compliance isn't a bad thing. If you have a good government, or a government that functions more or less, does more good things than bad things, or you're in a work environment where you've got a great company, a great bosses, compliance isn't necessarily a bad thing. We're like the church that I attend. It's largely governed pretty good, and I'm happily compliant with a lot of the stuff that we do.
Yeah.
So that's not a bad trait, when you talk about women. But the problem now is when there's this diabolical globalist agenda that's attempting to be implemented, and it's got all the rainbows and unicorns, SDGs, 17 SDGs with all the rainbow colors. It looks amazing. Who wouldn't want,
Yeah.
world peace, la la la, and people have no idea that it's the opposite what they're really trying to do. And so the people that get fooled by it, they want to be compliant, and as you say, maybe women are more compliant on that. We're going to jump to our break real quick, and you end the article saying the future is safety and kindness, and I love the AI generated image. It's kind of freaky, but it says the future is sustainable, but most importantly, the future is compliant. And I think that you really nail it. The future is compliant. That's what they want, but we need to do the opposite of that when it comes to the anti-human things that they want us to do, and in many cases illegal, immoral, and unethical things that they want us to comply with. So the Substack again is jjdawson.substack.com, Twitter X, real JJ Dawson. You can leave a question for JJ in the interactive live chat over at tntradio.live. Shoot me a mail through my contact form, or even call in. We'll be right back.
TNT.
Time is flying. It's our final segment here with JJ Dawson of jjdawson.substack.com. I'm subscribed to the Stack, and I very much enjoy every new musing by JJ. And I wanted to get to some of your also recent stacks. One of them was Club a Koala to Death and Save the Planet. The incoherent ideology of the progressive woke is not left-wing. It is simply the blueprint for globalist tyranny. And then I also want to get to, in the time that we have left, some white pill here. You write, this was published today, 3 conversations I've had recently that suggest the tide is turning. But, your thoughts on this blueprint for globalist tyranny, the green agenda, how it's going. You've got, apparently German farmers are now rebelling. I had a guest on, René de Vries. He's a Canadian. He's a Dutch Canadian and political candidate for the People's Party of Canada with Maxime Bernier. And he feels that the tide is turning in the Netherlands. So your thoughts on some of the madness, the Great Reset madness that continues?
Yeah, sure. The koala thing was close to my heart, and anyone who reads that article, which has another wonderful AI generated image, by the way, I've been using that quite a lot recently. AI is not all bad. I'm, as I say in the article, I'm an animal lover, and in that sense, you could call me a conservationist. I lay out in that article, the traditional tenets of leftism, which are a concern for workers' rights, being tolerant of alternative lifestyles, fairness, equality, and indeed a concern for the natural environment and the creatures who rely on it to survive. In that sense, you could say I've got some left-wing views, because I want to conserve the environment. I don't agree with ploughing down thousands of hectares of core animal habitat to make way for urban development where possible. But it's not even urban development. I mean, they are doing that and destroying koala habitat here in Australia. But now what they're doing is they're wiping out thousands of hectares of core koala habitat to put up these wind turbines. Wind turbines which create a trickle of the energy of fossil fuel or nuclear fuel, and the incoherence of this argument here is that what we call the modern left, and this is why I'm always saying we have to stop saying the left, because it's not the left as most of us traditionally understand it. If you were to say what's a left-wing person, you'd probably list off the tenets that I just spoke about before, and one of them is a concern for conservation and for all God's creatures. But what they're doing up in Queensland at the moment, where probably the bulk of the koalas in Australia live, is they're clearing all this land to put up these wind turbines, and the specified method for dealing with the koalas who get made homeless by this development is to euthanize them using a hammer by way of a sharp blow to the back of the skull. And this came out in an official government document, and it was exposed and spoken about on some more conservative-leaning channels here in Australia. But I was enraged at this on a personal level. But then I took that and spun it into the article because it illustrates for me perfectly the incoherence of the woke ideology, which a lot of people refer to as leftism. But I don't see it as leftism in the traditional sense of the word. I've written extensively about how I think the corporate machine some decades ago co-opted leftism and sort of put it on and now wears it as a skin suit, as a way of legitimizing itself, especially to the younger generations who are all about, kindness and fairness and equality. But, if anyone can tell me what is traditionally left wing about bashing koalas on the back of the head to put up these useless pieces of junk which break down and burn out and just look hideous, by the way, and will never supply the energy needs that are required, then I'm all ears. And it goes back to the old sticking point. None of them want to discuss nuclear energy. New generation nuclear energy is safe. It can be done safely if it's managed properly and if it's constructed properly. But they don't want that because it's not actually about creating energy and creating a sustainable future. Nuclear energy is clean when it's managed properly. And I actually have no problem with fossil fuels either. I mean, I think ideally it would be better if we had less, car exhaust, and I don't mind electric vehicles and all that. But the point I make in the article is this is not actually about energy. It's about creating this new control system whereby the population of the Earth will be immiserated and impoverished through.
Let me read that quote. You write here, quote, "Sustainable energy is not the end game. The end game is an impoverished and subservient underclass of modern day peasants, an underclass that encircles the earth and is so hobbled by its own misery and poverty that it hasn't a hope in hell of deposing its thin stratum of overlords." At least if they would have made koala burgers or something. But it's just last week they reported that breathing now contributes to global boiling. Meanwhile, in China they have historic freezing records of cold, and it's I keep saying everywhere. Peter St. Unge released his latest clip that the housing, 16 million plus young Americans now are being priced out of the market. That paragraph sums it up. What you write, that it's about neo-feudalism. That's all it comes down to. All of this stuff. As you mentioned, the renewables. I've had on scientists working in the energy field, and they say the same thing, that wind and solar, it's a complete sham. It's never going to work to replace fossil fuels, and it's all about wiping out the middle class and bringing in this neo-feudalism. And we're down to about 4 minutes to midnight, a little more, JJ. And any thoughts on that, as well as your thoughts on the tide turning? You mentioned Tim Pool recently, how he's spent a large part of the year declaring adamantly that we are winning, that more and more people are waking up to the gross abuses of our ruling elite and shunning their previously held faith in the system. Seems that the white pill attitude has certainly gained ascendance over the black pill disposition of late. You cite James Lindsay as well. Your further thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to round out the year with a white pill, because I have a tendency to get black pilled in my writing from time to time, and when you see what's going in, I 100% agree with you. It is about neo-feudalism, and if it was about creating abundant clean energy, we'd just do nuclear. But it's not all hope lost, and, I've had my issues with Tim Pool in the past. it annoys me the way he refuses to acknowledge the vaccine issue and various other things around the 2020 election. However, I do tend to agree with him that the tide may be turning. And I just, it's more of a gut feeling that I get. And anecdotally speaking, from conversations I've had with people, I mentioned 3 of them in my most recent article, which was published today. The most significant one probably being, and this was where I referenced Lindsay, he says that sort of jerking people out of the matrix and awakening them to what is going on, it's not easy. But what you can do, what individuals can do, and I think often individuals on our side of the fence feel quite disempowered. And I had a friend ask me, what can I do? He was actually talking about the whole Gaza thing, and this was what actually activated him. This was a guy who'd never been political. He was just a music producer, enjoying his life. But the whole Gaza thing, because he'd just recently become a father, really upset him. And he was looking around for answers and trying to untangle the mess and figure out what was going on. And he came to me because he knew I was into politics. And that's what James Lindsay called in the talk that I referenced being a landing pad for people. He says, what we individuals can do is be there for people who have questions, be a landing pad is what he says. And when they come to you, you can say, well, look, this thing you're talking about, it's like this other thing. And I had a friend come to me recently. This is the guy who got activated by the whole Gaza thing. But you see, that led him off down a rabbit hole. And so, the machine wants him activated and upset by Gaza. It wants him in a state of flux and disorientation. But they can't always control what effect that's going to have on people. So my friend got taken off down the rabbit hole. Next thing you know, he's asking questions about the global monetary system, the fractional reserve banking system. I put him onto the creature from Jekyll Island. Just the other night, he sends me this video of Julian Assange talking about how the Afghanistan war was just a means of basically ripping off the taxpayers of the United States and funneling money offshore so they could launder it and then put it back into their own pockets. And he literally said to me, do you know anything about this idea? I don't understand it. And this was literally hours after I'd finished listening to Lindsay's talk, in which he says, these people will come to you and say, I don't understand this. Can you please explain it to me? And you can be a landing pad for them. And I don't believe that was a coincidence, because mere hours later, he came to me and spoke those exact words. I don't understand this. So I was able to be that landing pad. And I said to him basically, well, it's true. And I just sort of explained a few of my thoughts on the way they manage these wars and funnel all these tax dollars offshore to then put into slush funds and do God knows what with. And he immediately equated that to Ukraine and to Gaza. And he said, so they can do that with Ukraine and Gaza as well. And I said, absolutely. What do you think they're doing right now? And, through that process of being that landing pad, he's now educating himself, expanding his ideas on it, and he can now be that landing pad for others. So I think that's positive, and it does suggest the tide's turning.
We're out of time. Thank you so much, JJ. I think I have the blessing of when I talk to people, I can show a photo with me and Ed Griffin, or if it's Bilderberg, I've got a photo with me, Daniel Estulin, or myself and Ron Paul. So that adds a little bit more oomph there. But thank you, JJ. Have a great Christmas and New Year, and talk to you soon.